Welcome to MTG Evolving Wild. My name's Mark,
I'm Cody.
Ron coming in.
and today we're going to be talking about the standard format, what it's been since we started playing Magic, how it's changed in the meantime, and what it's going to look like in the future. I think we should probably start with what standard is for people who don't know.
So, for people who don't know, Standard is a 60 card format involving sets from the last now 3 years, actually. This is a very recent change that was just made.
We'll get to that later.
Um, Playing only those sets that came out in that time period.
And you can have four of each card in a standard deck, whereas in Commander, the format we usually play, you can only have one of each.
Right. And I mean, yeah, I don't know. Are we missing any other
15 card sideboard.
15 card sideboard?
And yeah,
right.
the main kind of feature of it to kind of have a new and fresh format is that there would be sets that rotated in and sets that rotated out. That happens once a year, but then the sets that would rotate out would be in a 2-year time span.
Right.
So sets would be in standard for 2 years before rotating out.
Right. And one big thing about standard is, kind of as the name implies, it's sort of meant to be, or at one point it was, the main format of playing Magic the Gathering. This was supposed to be the most accessible and main way cards were designed and players were intended to play the game.
Yeah. We hear a lot of stories about how people used to play at Friday night Magic events. They used to play standard, or that would be a feature. And nowadays, it's hard for, even in an area where we live where there's a lot of Magic going on, like finding any kind of standard event, standard tournament is.
In paper, at least.
In paper, yeah, is extremely difficult. I was looking into one the other day that was like kind of a lead, and then that kind of turned into like, oh, we don't really do standard events. We just offer that, but no one really comes in for it. Whereas Commander nights anywhere, everywhere will be filled to the brim.
Absolutely. I remember the last Commander night we went to. It was wall to wall
Really? Wow.
players. Yeah.
It was tons.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just Commander has really skyrocketed as the new main format now. So it's kind of interesting to sort of take a deep dive and sort of think like, all right, like how would it be to get into what technically is supposed to be the main format during a time where it's not really the main format?
I know, believe it or not, there was a time before Commander, and
What?
like Standard and Modern were, I think, the main formats that were played. And yeah, to see what those are today is really interesting. I'm sure very different than what they were in the past because of some things we're going to get into, but still really interesting formats. And I know we've kind of tried to build some standard decks recently, even to just play them against each other and see what the format's like. And that's been an exciting process. And I think Cody's almost done with his mono blue deck.
Just so close.
I've
I'm
got
like
my-
5 cards away.
I've got my mono red deck all ready to go, so we're about ready to try it in paper. I think before we get into it, we should probably talk about like what kind of experience we've all had with standard. I know it's like kind of limited for some of us, but what are your guys'
Yeah,
experience?
no pun intended.
Truthfully, I have not had really any experience with Standard up until trying to build this deck that I'm like 5 cards away from.
So close, Cody.
I'm so close. And I just have to try a couple more of the LGSs around here.
Dude, I already got you like 3 of them. We talked about this.
I know. It's those other 2 that I'm going to struggle with.
I think I have a spare Consider or 2 jingling around somewhere.
Well, anyways, your standard deck's coming along.
Yeah, I'm excited for it to finally come together.
Yeah, man.
And then what about you, Ron?
I don't really play standard. Not out of any sort of malice or anything, but I don't know. The format never really appealed to me, and as a player who got into Magic the Gathering through Commander and the whole appeal of you get to build around this legendary creature and eternal formats and very sort of creative and self-expressionistic deck building, standard hasn't really appealed to me because it always kind of felt like, oh, if this is going to be some kind of format where I'm going to find a deck I really like, spend a whole bunch of money on it, and then it's going to rotate out in a little bit, and now I'm going to have to either break the deck apart or build something that I didn't necessarily want it to be. It didn't really sound appealing. However, as I've been sort of getting a little bit more into Commander, and although I'm not an arena player either, I'm not a fan of that either, I do sort of see the appeal of 60 card limited deck building, and I think really that there's a lot of fun to be had, and I think with some of the changes going on, I'm getting a lot more curious and interested to get into it. So I guess maybe we're kind of like the steps up where it's like I'm like thinking about getting into it, Cody's getting into it, and then Mark seems
Yeah, I've played a lot of standard on Arena, so mainly digital, which was the format I got introduced to Magic. But yeah, like a lot of just mono red, like what's it called? Just mono red aggro type of decks.
aggro,
like,
burn,
yeah,
chickens.
just little guys like going in, and that I've played standard through a number of formats or a number of sets, I guess. Like when I played when Eldraine was still in, so I was getting to play that really fun Embercleave standard where it was like, all right, turn 3, can I swing in 2 open mana? Boom, done. I win the game. Embercleave was fun. Oh my god.
Until you get elked.
Elk wasn't that card wasn't too.
Because I think it was already banned.
Oh yeah, right, right. Oko, good point. But yeah, I've played a lot of kind of like I haven't had a full experience of standard because it's mainly just been like the one deck that I've been able to afford with my wild cards on Arena. But I've gotten to kind of taste a little bit of it, like just that one type of deck and how that kind of moves in standard. And honestly, I think that if there's not a mono red aggro deck in standard, I'm probably not playing standard.
I mean, that's valid. If there's ever a point where there is no mono red aggro deck, I think something fundamentally deep down went really wrong with Wizard of the Coast's R&D.
At least like tier 2, like make it a bad
oh well,
red
depending
aggro.
on like how high the tier is, that's a whole other question.
I mean, if you want a bad mono red deck, I could build you one.
No, we have Popper for good mono red.
Yeah, and exactly. But no, standard still has that aspect of it, and so I put that together and got a lot of games in. But I really started playing around that Eldraine time and noticed a few things right off the bat that like there were new sets coming out. The one I'm thinking of really is like when Strixhaven came out, I was playing standard and none of the cards were really like used in standard. There might have been 2-3 cards from Strixhaven's release that got used in standard, but aside from that, it was all like, I mean, not all, but a lot of Eldraine stuff. Like,
I feel like that's kind of par for the course with standard, is that there's like 1, maybe 2 sets where you're getting like 80% of the card pool that you're for the deck that you're using. And then you get like a couple cards here and there where it's like, okay, cool, this fits in really nicely, and you're making those changes. And I think that's kind of the appeal to it, is that you just have to like kind of get in on the sets that are the good ones, and then just fill in with the new stuff that comes out.
yeah. But yeah, we really started getting into Magic around that, I guess, that time when a lot of people would consider standard to be an unplayable or not very fun or a broken for one reason or another format. I think some of that still carries over today, but I know that's something we kind of wanted to discuss is like we never I mean we've kind of existed in Magic like as players post when standard got not good according to some people or a lot
Most
of people.
people
Yeah, most
accordingly.
people.
Yeah, it's never the format that I heard much about, and at the time, even though I mostly mained Commander or only played Commander, I still knew of other formats, but Standard was like, huh, what? There's a main format to Magic and it's not Commander? What? But unironically, as a new player, it was wild to me that this main format of Commander was in such a weird state. And so, yeah, but I'm excited to get more into it.
I know it there was a lot of problems with I think one of the things was like bannings and like how powerful really they made Eldraine and sets around it.
Right, like we mentioned the card Oko, Thief of Crowns, and I actually have the card pulled up here so we can kind of take a look and break down its stat lines to see exactly what we're talking about. It is a Planeswalker, cost of 1 colorless, 1 green, and 1 blue mana, and he has 4 loyalty counters. You can +2 him to create a food token. You can +1 him to give a target artifact or creature, to make them lose all their abilities and turns them into a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3, or you can -5 him to exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target creature an opponent controls with power 3 or less. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and for standard for a format that's not supposed to be very overly there's some level of balance to it. It's not like the best cards ever in all of Magic's history. It's just like this limited card pool.
This is still a very strong card regardless.
This card itself may be among some of the most powerful cards in Magic history.
And the design, it's hard to say how much of it was done on purpose, but there's no question that, some of the most powerful cards in Magic when Alpha was printed or when the really early sets were printed, those were like almost accidents or like the game was in a different state then than it is now. Mm-hmm. There was more intention to how powerful they made a card like Oko in when was it, 2019?
Yeah, October 2019.
Yeah, there was way more intention to making that card crazy busted. They might not have known exactly how powerful it was going to be, but they knew, it wasn't, nobody was going to like not be using it.
Right. I mean, I think really just that +1 is just so incredibly strong. And the fact that it is a plus, you get to basically remove artifact or a creature on your opponent's board each turn at no cost to you.
And remind me, this is a 3-mana Planeswalker?
This is a 3-mana Planeswalker. 1 colorless, green and blue.
So it comes down on 3, has a big booty of 4 loyalty counters.
Which you can +1 him immediately.
Yeah, so that's 5 loyalty counters. And it removes your creature.
Or artifact.
Yes.
And next turn, you could even ult him. Because his ult is a -5.
Yeah. Oko is... Like, there are tweaks that people could do, like, obviously turning the second +1 of making the... Or
into a -1?
Sure, into even a -1, like making the ult higher up, maybe starting with less loyalty. There's a bunch of shit that you could do to, like, change that. But it's, the level they pushed it to is just so unbelievable. Like, 3 mana to just have, like... every turn repeatable removal in standard in a pretty like wide range of targets,
and in a format where you can run 4 of them.
I will say the only thing, like the only kind of like I'm trying to just play devil's advocate here. Like I guess if you're looking at it from a limited sort of standpoint, you can say that he doesn't actually remove the permanents. He turns them into an elk, and theoretically, that elk can attack the Oko eventually.
Yeah, but you can just gain control of that elk.
That's true, but it's a -5, and it's pretty. You got to build up some loyalty for that. But to be fair, if you're taking multiple turns and you have some kind of creatures on board, which you probably do if you're playing green-blue.
Well, it comes down on 3. So on
Yeah.
1, on 2, you're probably playing something slow and small to the ground, which
Yeah.
now is a body to put in front to prevent any damage coming in at him.
That's true. That's true. And I didn't even think about it. You could theoretically +1 your own creature if you want to make a little guy a bigger guy.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Or you can even turn the food. You can animate the food that he creates as well. You can +2 him to make the food token, and then you could +1 that food token to make it a 3/3 elk.
Yeah, you could.
And it wouldn't have summoning sickness if you made the food token on the turn
you
before.
could also +2 to make the food token. Then on the next turn, you can ultimate give somebody a food token and take whatever you want. I think, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exchange control target artifact or creature you control and target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less. So, yeah.
So you can take
It has to take a creature with power 3 or less.
most likely something that they've played by turn 3.
Yeah, like power 3 or less is not too hard of a criteria to meet, especially in the early turns of when this card is being played.
Yeah. So Oko is just one of a few different kind of these like really pushed cards. As much as I love Embercleave, that card is also kind of crazy when you think about it in a standard environment. I think it's like based on the number of creatures you're attacking with, it costs 1 less.
Yeah, here, I got it. So it's an artifact equipment. So the cost is 4 colorless and 2 red. It's legendary, and it has flash, and which means you can cast it at any point. You can cast an instant. And this says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. And when it enters the battlefield, you can instantly attach it to a target creature you control, bypassing the equip cost. And the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and double strike and trample. And if you do need to equip it, it has an equip cost of 3.
Yeah. That is incredible because you could like fake having an Embercleave and psych people out, especially if Embercleave's like as oppressive as it was when it was in standard. But usually like people can't really do much about it. Like on turn 3, you can play it on curve if you've cast a creature every turn before that. Well, at least if those creatures can attack. But usually it's like turn 3 or 4, if you have Embercleave, you're just winning. Because something's coming in, and trample and double strike just makes it so like the creature's protected almost because it has double strike. The creature deals all the damage on both hits because of trample.
Yeah.
It has flash, so like if you swing with enough creatures, you can
2 red.
Costs 2 mana.
No, yeah. Well, not only that, but you can equip it right away to an unblocked creature.
Exactly. That's the other thing is like if they had like 1 beefy blocker and you had 3 things swinging in, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like you can't block all 3 of them. If you block the biggest one, Embercleave's still going on the little one, you know?
Yeah, it's a great card. I mean, it still sees play in some commander decks. I know I play it in one of my commander decks, my Boros equipment deck, and it's just a very cool, fun, strong card. But I can definitely see how it would break a limited format.
It's really good. And another one I'm thinking specifically from Eldraine is the Great Henge. Another just like
So good.
He's getting reprinted, thankfully.
Thank God. It's like a $60 card, and it's just so good.
And I think it's coming out in a commander precon. But anyways,
it's a 9 mana legendary artifact, 7 and 2 green, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you're playing green stompy stuff and you have a 7 power creature, it costs 2 green mana, comes down and you can tap it to add 2 green mana. And on top of that, you gain 2 life from the tap. So 2 green mana to make a 2 green mana and gain 2 life. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Like,
That's an engine, a payoff, and ramp all in its own.
sometimes I forget about how good that card is because there's just so many words. Like, there's so many things it does. Like,
Yeah.
and each one is like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, that's another one from
It's
Eldraine
honestly like the most the pie breaking green card I can think of off the top of my head.
I mean, it ramps. Ramping is pretty green. 1/1 counters are pretty green. Caring about power and toughness is green. It feels. I think it feels very green. I think it's
a lot
very
of-
strong.
It's drawing you a card every time a creature enters.
I mean, it's creature-based card
That
draw
is
effects.
very
That is a
green.
green thing, like Beast Whisper effects. That's a pretty green thing.
also not like drawing cards is not a green effect.
So there are a number of cards.
Green gets everything. Don't you know that?
Clear, except for creature removal.
It fights. You just cast a big boy and you fight. That's creature removal.
Yeah, it also does have some creature removal, but bottom line being that like these are some of the outstanding cards in the set. By no means is that all of them. Like there are tons of cards that are extremely good from this set that are like
Questing Beast.
Just curious, in that Embercleave mono red deck, were you playing 7 dwarves?
no.
It seems like it's like such a perfect fit. Like you can run 7 of them.
No,
but they also get +1/+1 for each other dwarf that you have.
I'll tell you what it was running was this card Robber of the Rich.
I know the card.
Yeah.
Reach. Okay, here's another. Maybe not as busted as some of the ones we mentioned, but in standard was like such a good card. And when it was in standard, I think it was like a $15 card. Now it's like down to like $2, but it's 2 mana for a 2/2 with reach, with haste. So already we're doing good. When it attacks, doesn't even have to deal combat damage. If defending player has more cards in hand than you, exile the top card of their library. During any turn you attacked with a rogue, you can cast that card and you may spend mana as though it were any mana of any color to cast that spell. So
Oh my god, it's so good.
it is
Yeah.
really good. It's like you can get access to that card on later turns. And again, 4 Robbers of the Rich in the deck, so you just keep going in, exiling cards off the top, taking away their land drop, taking away their removal, using it for yourself because you can use any color to cast it. Like running those, running Bone Crusher Giant because it was like a lightning strike, but also attached to a body. Like, and now we get Lightning Strike in standard, but no body attached to it.
So much better.
Nobody.
But like this wasn't only a problem in Eldraine. In the same like year or in early 2020, I guess, Ikoria came out too, in the same chunk of standard releases in between the core sets.
Let's see here. Next one was
Theros.
Yeah, Theros Beyond Death. And then, Ikoria came out April of 2020.
And there are some cards in Ikoria that got released in
Equally
standard
busted.
that needed like to be fixed right away before they even got into the format, or like really early on into their entry into the format.
The companion cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, immediately upon launch.
That they were so good that like they had to make them worse, and they didn't even have, I mean, like the cards were out, they said one thing, but the rules were a completely different thing because they changed the rules after they came out to make them worse because they just were too good. You just had an extra creature in a standard deck, where in Commander, I think the reason they give you an extra creature, or to have that one creature you can always go to, is because you only have one of each other card. Like you don't really have as much consistency as running a standard deck where you get 4 of the same card a bunch of different times. So it's like combining the consistency of having a commander with a format where you already have all these crazy cards. It's just like an extra card you get to cast whenever you want if you don't have anything good enough to play otherwise.
Yeah, it's a significant advantage against whoever else you're playing. And again, and like some companions, like Yorion comes to mind, really don't even have a strict requirement to be your companion.
Well, it needed a
like 20 more cards. In Commander, he's not legal to be your companion, but in other formats, Yorion has seen a lot of play. Wasn't he recently banned in Modern?
Yes.
or was it
Pioneer?
Pioneer, I think
it might have
he
been
was
both. But I know.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I was actually just flipping through some of the cards from Eldraine and combine that with your the Charming Prince came out in in Eldraine, which has a flicker effect. Which, when you combine it with Yorion, which also has a flicker effect, you now have these loops that you're doing that...
Yeah, every single turn on your turn and your opponent's turn, you will get all of your enters the battlefield effects and untap potentially your land, or you're not your land, but like your non-land permanents.
Do we even need to talk about how insane Lurrus was, not just in Standard, but in so many formats?
And everything that's come since. Lurrus has also just seen a ban fairly recently.
So to be more specific about what happened with the companions, they got nerfed from just basically essentially starting in your hand and being able to cast them for their mana cost to now you have to pay 2 mana in order to put them into your hand to then be able to cast them. Mm-hmm. That didn't stop Lurrus from being absolutely devastating in Modern and making it so that a bunch of decks were now just running 1 and 2 drop creatures just to play Lurrus. And not even because Lurrus's restriction is all the creatures need to have, I want to say, less than 3 CMC.
Something.
I think it's 2 or less. Yeah,
2 or less.
I think that's the exact wording. Is 2 or less.
So,
2 or less. You're right.
That in Modern, that was just making it so people were like, "Oh, this is a 3 drop, so I'm not going to run it because I'm running Lurrus," and
wow,
it was that oppressive. That it was just like, "Oh, you're playing with black or white and you're running something above a 3 drop." No, that's how many cards it was shutting down. That design space was so busted in that way. I know they were trying to kind of make something like Commander or get the Commander crowd into Standard.
Right, but it seems funny because, kind of jumping forward, it seems like Commander players did end up sort of being Wizards of the Coast's target audience with a lot of sets, but that did start to seep into Standard as well.
Yeah, I think people, or Wizards was absolutely making sets based around Commander players and what Commander players would want to get. So I know back in the day, I want to say maybe your average Standard set would have 4 or 5 legendary creatures, maybe, if that. Sometimes there'd be a planeswalker or 2 here and there. Your average standard set now probably has at least 20 legendary creatures, a few different cycles of legendary creatures.
Well, okay, so there's... I think you see that there's a lot less of the legendary creatures in the standard cycles, depending on which decks are being played. I can think of a couple decks that run a lot of them.
But in the actual set releases, how many legendary creatures?
Oh, you're talking about the set.
Yeah, the set list.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about decks. No. God, I think over the last 3 years, there's something like 80% of all legendary creatures have been printed.
Yeah. And part of that has to do with the fact that they're just throwing legendary creatures into standard. Cards that are, incredible commanders, you could make, amazing, cool, weird, one-of-a-kind decks with, or they're the best new thing to make this type of archetype with. But they're putting them in standard products where they don't really see play. They don't really do much. They kind of just are worse off for being legendary, because if you have two of them on the field at the same time,
They go away.
You got to sacrifice one of them. Yeah. So, the fact that they're making more of these legendary creatures directly affects how standard is played, what decks are used, what cards are used in those decks, and like, just the format itself. It seems like, I don't know, they might not put so many legendary creatures in a set that's supposed to be primarily about playing four of certain cards in a deck.
Yeah, and just I was really curious. I did the math and calculation on this. There are over 40 legendary creatures in Dominaria United.
That set was specifically about legendary creatures.
It was, but it's still a lot of legendary creatures.
40 of how many different creatures? Like,
that's a good question.
Let's give a little perspective to this number. I know you're kind of doing this on the fly.
a little bit. But so what information are you?
So
how many total creatures were in Dominaria United, and how many of them are?
Okay, so out of all that, oh boy, it doesn't give me easy number. I kind of had to calculate it, but a lot more than 40. But okay,
we're just sitting here count. Okay, we'll let Ron count. When Ron finishes counting, he'll get back to us. Right now we're trusting Ron with math, which is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, this is a bad idea, but we'll live with it.
We'll see what it comes out. It's probably going to be like what it was, 40 legendary creatures.
I'm going to guess that there's like 90 creatures total.
So we'll see what Ron says, but that I wouldn't be surprised if it's far off that, or maybe even less than that. So it'd probably be half or more than half or something. But
okay, so roughly speaking, so I counted, including tokens, admittedly, there are around 180 creatures.
Okay.
So let's just take away 15 for tokens, roughly.
So 40 out of 160-ish?
Yeah, so that's 25% of...
It's a really big ratio.
25% of the creatures that could be used in a limited environment, in standard, anything from playing from that set is going to be legendary, which means all of those could be your commander if you're playing commander, but...
Great for commander players.
Might not have much of a impact in standard, or if anything could have a bit of a hindrance depending on how you're playing it.
And we say that, yet there is probably the single strongest creature in standard or a lot of other limited formats. Sheoldred,
the Apocalypse,
which is a legendary creature, and you still see people running 4 of them, and the card is ungodly expensive.
It's definitely not as bad as Oko, right?
Not quite, but I mean, listen, this is still a very oppressive piece. It's
right. I'm just saying,
in terms of oppression, sure, it's not as bad as Oko. In terms of pricing, I think it's worse than the Oko was.
Well, at its heyday,
I think Oko was pushing 100, kind of, or something along those lines.
I thought it was closer to like 30 something per Oko.
I'm pretty sure that's why. I could be wrong, but I think that's why so many people were upset when Oko got banned, because they just went out and bought maybe it was 30 times 4, so like $120 worth of Okos, and then boom, like you can't play it anymore in standard.
Can we look this up?
I actually kind of have something pulled up. I think at around its heyday, so around January of right around when Theros was starting to come out. Its peak is at a bit over $60-ish.
Okay. So that would be so that is Sheoldred pricing.
Almost.
Yeah.
Sheoldred is still more expensive.
Yes. Sheoldred is, man, that's a crazy card. I think part of it too is that, here's another thing. Oko can't be your commander, but Sheoldred can be your commander. Legendary creature. Oh, moneymaker, secondary market. Probably be seeing more really good cards that are legendary creatures specifically, like
there's a card in the mono red standard deck that you play that's limited because it's a legendary creature, right?
Yeah, there's actually I think in my arena deck I run 4 of them, but I've seen a lot of people run 3 of them, probably because it is legendary. It's the Feldon card from Brothers War. 2 mana 2/2 with haste, which is pretty standard in mono red decks.
No pun intended.
Ha! Oh my god, you're gonna keep getting me with these.
Yep.
But that's one of the 2 drops in that deck, and it'd be great if I could put multiple of them on the battlefield at the same time without, needing some kind of special rules changing card or anything. But I've had so many times where it's like, all right, swing in with one, and now I want to cast the other one just so I have a blocker up. I can't have both. Could have done more damage, but it's kind of a noticeable drawback to that, having that card be legendary. But commander players could potentially use this 2 mana 2/2 with haste as their commander.
I mean, keep in mind, it could also have been just purely for balancing as well. I mean, just because there are a lot of legendary creatures who can be commanders, it's fairly obvious that not quite all of them are quite designed for commander. Most, if not all, are, but I wouldn't say like 100%.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, balancing should be something that's considered, but before Commander was such a big deal, again, we saw standard sets that were pretty fairly balanced and maybe had a few legendary permanents here and there. And, some sets more than others, like ones where there were more important characters and stuff like that. There might be like, closer to 10 maybe. But like those, I feel like, they were still able to balance or doing other things around those. And from what I hear, make pretty balanced standard formats, environments without needing that legendary thing. But
There's also other ways that they could balance it besides the legendary, like super type, where, instead of it being a 2 mana 2/2, it's now like a 3 mana 2/1, or, something like they could change, the card a little bit to make it a little more fair for how good the effect is.
yeah, but because they're designing around so many legendary creatures now, that can be utilized as a setback in certain instances. Um, but yeah, like there was all this kind of crazy, you know, Eldraine and Ikoria, and even some of the sets around it, Theros and Kaldheim, like power creep, and Zendikar too had some.
It's
Zendikar
pretty easy
Rising.
to talk about.
Yeah, like all of them did, but one kind of interesting thing that I noticed was, I think when Eldraine and when Ikoria rotated out, a lot of people kind of dropped standard because, for one, all of their expensive cards that they bought or crafted on MTG Arena were now kind of useless in standard. But it was also like all of these like really powerful cards kind of went away, and the format maybe to some extent like became more bland or like less powerful feeling, which maybe that's how it should have always been, but it was noticeable enough to people that it was like, I don't know if I want to keep playing this.
So I would also just like to give a little context here. Both Eldraine and Ikoria came out like between October of 2019 and April of 2020, which
Within the same standard year.
no, but like there was also COVID from like March of 2020 kind of going forward, which put a halt to a lot of paper play for at least a year.
Yeah.
So that probably didn't help with a lot of people losing interest in standard.
Right. I think at that point in time, I feel like they might have lost interest in standard though, because of, well, obviously there's like a transition, but at the beginning of that period of time, they may have lost interest in standard because of how, you know, you'd kind of see the same cards in the same decks just doing the same stuff.
And they're all getting jacked up because they're high in demand for these specific decks.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's crazy. I mean, maybe part of the reason why people left, as you mentioned, because of the price drops, is kind of part of an inherent downside to the format as a whole. Given it's probably good that these things rotated out and the format was kind of made really able to be more like fresh. It's like having a fresh start.
Yeah.
It's like they swiped the land clean, and now you get
Wrath
to do
of
whatever
God,
you want.
board wipe.
Yeah, Wrath of God, board wipe. You only have your lands now, and we're gonna keep playing.
That's kind of how it felt when that particular standard rotated, I remember, because it was like, okay, all of these cards that were like literally taking up like probably 85% of the metagame are just gone. What are you left with now? Like what are you left with from Zendikar, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, and at that point the D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set? Like what are you going to put together with this? And there definitely is, some excitement to that, to having like a new frontier, but people also realized that it was like, all right, it's not the same. Like these decks aren't doing what they did before.
The play style has completely shifted away from how crazy pushed it was before to what we were left with.
And I think they recovered over time, but definitely it was really noticeable in that moment that there was a drop off, there was a shift, and it was not the most exciting. Well, it was not exciting for a different reason than it used to be not exciting for.
So
Still not exciting.
weird thing that I've just kind of put together. I don't know if you guys have heard, but like I've heard from like D&D, or from not D&D, from the WotC like design teams, that it takes about 3 years for them to implement any change. Because of like how far out they're designing sets and stuff. So, like, if you kind of notice, there's Eldraine and Ikoria, and then like 3 years of kind of meh standard, and then you have what we currently have now, where it's Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa, Nuka Penna. 3 years later,
Was it 3 years later? Let's see.
2019, they came out in 2020,
2019 to 2020.
2022.
Yeah,
So,
3 years.
It-
Three-ish.
ish.
Ish, yeah.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
But yeah, you definitely start to notice how much of a delay there is there to the maybe more grand design scheme of things. But it would be nice if those changes could be implemented sooner, especially in Standard, which is a format that needs as much help as it can get.
Right. Yeah, I mean, now there's like little to no paper play. Everything is pretty much just shifted online.
But I think one thing that we all kind of agreed on in talking about it before the episode was how important Kamigawa Neon Dynasty was for changing Standard into a format that was more exciting. And that set was so impactful, it was such a success in every single way, from commander players getting really, really great new legendary creatures to standard players just getting all these
Good stuff cards.
good stuff cards that are like really good, which some of them might have just gotten banned.
And and then limited play was a lot of fun too. Just drafting that set, and the pre-release was probably my favorite pre-release I've done.
It's the first one I've done, and it's definitely up there with one of my favorites I've done.
Honestly, everything from the flavor of the set to the world building that they had going on, the art, the strength of cards at every level, from common, uncommon, rare, mythic. It was just masterfully done.
Sorry.
You first one.
I was just gonna say they definitely got it right on the Weeaboo fan service there too. A lot of points from a lot of players, I'm sure.
I think that is, at least in our time in the game, like the set that we can all look to and be like, oh, this was like kind of a masterpiece. Like,
Yeah.
this was like one that's going to be talked about for years to come and is going to be like the one that's like, okay, this is where things were kind of okay again. Like, and I mean, I think it's going to be, huge for such a like long period of time. Like, when are we going to get the next? And Kamigawa Neon Dynasty to some degree still has its problems, but when are we going to get the next set like that? That was so exciting. That was so new and had all these like intricate changes and details, and but still, like, didn't change anything to the point where it was weird or not fun or unplayable, but just like kind of perfect like that.
Fingers crossed. The new Ixalan set coming out next year.
Let's see, yeah, because I think really the big appeal of Neon Dynasty is kind of the nostalgia factor for older players and even for newer players who've seen the older Kamigawa cards to an extent, because it's like you get direct references to them, and really I think it's cool that you're visiting a plane so many years in the future that the plane is like fundamentally changed, and seeing that change is a really cool thematic thing.
I think we could do a whole episode on how amazing Kamigawa Neon
I'm
Dynasty
sure,
is.
I'm
I'm
sure.
just thinking about even like the enchantment cycle, the saga cycle that flips into old creatures or like references to old creatures. Like,
Yeah,
Yep.
and now they were doing that with the new Praetors too.
Yeah,
I guess the other
that's
way
true,
around.
huh?
It's the other way around because
Oh,
now
yeah.
they're creatures that flip into sagas.
they just said, what if the other side of the Kamigawa cards are the front side? That's
Literally.
really funny.
What if
I
we put
didn't
the
think
boss
about that.
monster on the front? Wait, what?
I didn't even realize that. Yeah, no, I definitely see that. But again, like maybe a concept that started in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that then got carried over and utilized later. But I'm even thinking of the channel lands. Some of them are very
Yeah.
powerful, very expensive, all that. But that idea is so cool and it works really well. Um, it's to some extent it's like, oh, this is just better in almost any case than a regular land, because especially with Boseiju, it just being removal on a land is really good.
I
I think
mean,
those lands are legendary though, right?
They are. So in standard, you might not want to run 4 of them.
Yeah.
unless you're using them as removal.
It's funny. They're still in standard, and I'm thinking about it now. I run 2 of them in my the Sokenzan, the one that makes 2 1/1s with haste. I run 2 of those in my standard deck, and there have been times before where it's like, perfect, turn 3, got my land drop, good to go. All right, I just need my 4th land, draw, second Sokenzan, and it's like, I don't have my 4th land drop. Like,
Yeah, it's a struggle, but I think it's a feature, not a bug.
I guess theoretically I could tap the land for mana, then play the other land and sacrifice the original one, and then tap it and still end up with 4 mana on that turn.
You could.
I haven't thought about that before. But yeah, I agree. In that case, it feels like more of a feature, because in standard, these lands are powerful enough that you need some kind of limiting factor to just like run 4 of them in every deck. And that limiting factor is like, how much do you want to press this before it's like, okay, you're missing land drops and the lands you're running you can't even use. So I think making them legendary was actually really good.
Yeah, and it's flavorful.
After that, we got New Capenna, which I really enjoy as a standard set, as just the mechanics it introduced, the finishing of the Triumph cycle, just like that whole, not as much of a win, I think, maybe as Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
I think it's just really hard to top what is probably the best set that we've had since we've been playing Paper Magic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
it's hard.
I do still really like New Capenna. I
I
think
love New Capenna. I think it's a great set, strong cards throughout.
probably underrated to some degree.
I'd say so. I like the set. I don't love it. I think the 1920s theme is like kind of cool, but it's also like I don't know. It didn't quite speak to me as much. Like it felt like Neon Dynasty, like Kamigawa. Like even though it felt like it was like cyberpunk, and it still felt rooted into its core and its magic. Whereas New Capenna was its own plane. So I think you kind of are going into this new kind of plane, and it's like okay, like this is like a totally different plane than what we normally see. And I think it had a lot of strengths. Like I really like the whole flavor of the families and how all the families are like the new shards, and I think that the kind of lore of how they got into power is pretty neat. Although, yeah, like as we were saying, it didn't feel like it was as much of a crazy big win as Neon Dynasty was. The mechanics were fun and they were fine. I remember when we played the pre-release packs, you got them in a box depending on which family you kind of wanted to join, so to speak.
That was so cool because then you got like a little like 5 or 6 card slot of just cards in that family.
Right, yeah, and I ended up pulling the Urabrask from my box too.
Phyrexian Text.
The Phyrexian Text Urabrask. Of course, it has to be like the $6 Praetor, but it's
Can't
it's
even read what he does.
it's okay. It's not important. It's not very good.
Oh God, we need to talk about that at some point.
I think somewhere, somehow, we already have. But yeah, still, it was a very fun draft experience. And while I don't think it was quite on the level of Neon Dynasty, still overall a positive set. And even if it wasn't totally your cup of tea like me, I still respect it. It's very cool, a lot of great cards, and overall, thumbs up for me.
I think Standard has been shifting to a more positive design space, a more positive environment. I think we're getting a different Standard. I mean, very obviously when we get to the changes they're implementing, but we're getting a different Standard than we would be getting if Commander was not such a popular format or like the Magic format. But we're getting a better Standard than we were getting maybe when Eldraine and Ikoria were coming out. And, despite it kind of being mid-range city right now, with just like every deck kind of being some form of mid-range, at least that's how it was for a while. There's a lot more diversity and a lot more options, a lot more questions to be asked about, like, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? There's not always like the best card for the job like there was back then. Now it's like sometimes there definitely is, but there are just more options to how you do what you want to do in Standard.
Yeah, for real. And I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy how it's changed. I mean, one other thing is like now, since it isn't really played in paper anymore, I mean, I guess everyone's just moving to Arena now.
Yeah, I mean, there might be, I mean, here we are building Standard decks in paper, which is probably such a waste of money. But,
we're hipsters.
I know,
with
right?
disposable income.
I think because I couldn't get these guys on Arena, I want to like play with them somehow. So I guess spending however much money we're spending on paper decks is the way. But
honestly, I'm so disappointed that there's not like paper events for Standard.
I would really love to go to some, especially like even smaller ones in the area. It's just
No one does it.
No one does it because it's not a profitable event to run because not enough people show up to it.
All right, screw it. We're moving to Modern or Pioneer.
No, please not Modern.
I like Pauper.
I like my savings account. Like
That's why I like Pauper. Also, Pauper is a healthy metagame right now.
You're young and in your 20s. You don't need a savings account. It's not like you're going to buy a house anytime soon.
I need to spend 5 figures on a trading card game.
But my play set of children's.
It's only like 4 figures for the average Modern deck.
I guess, yeah, then we're getting into Legacy with 5. But yeah, like some of the recent news we've heard about Standard and some of the changes that are going to shake the format up even more than like the popularity that Commander already has changed it up is, number one, they're changing from a 2-year rotation to a 3-year rotation, which means all of the cards that have been in standard for about the last 2 years are going to stay in it for another year with everything else that's coming out. There's going to be a bigger card pool of things to build from. Maybe that means that, each set can be a little bit more focused and unique and not as, well, I really don't know what it means. What do you
Just
guys
so
think?
rushed and dense, and everything is just kind of thrown at you, I guess.
Yeah.
I think the hope is to reinvigorate the paper play for standard. So it's not quite so much of like you're investing, X amount of dollars for a playset of this card, and in a year it's gone. Now it's okay, cool.
In 2 years, it's gone.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, that's still a lot of time. Like, even if you
Yeah.
play once a week, that's still 100 times that you got to play with that card.
Yeah, I think it is good for that reason, and I like that fact because I think I was on this idea of making a standard deck like before this got announced, and now that it did get announced, like I'm like, okay, I can keep playing with these cards. Maybe they won't be the you know in the metagame for standard anymore, but it'll at least be a deck that I've put together and can play in tournaments in the future, or if there ever are paper events we can find. But the vast majority of it has seemed to be taking place online, at least from a casual level. In Arena, really, I know there's weren't you telling me about someone who like started playing Magic in Arena, maybe playing standard events and just got up to like tournament level?
So it's going to kill me that I can't think of the guy's name anymore. But yeah, I was watching the first iteration of the Pro Tour when it came back, and there was a guy who started playing Arena on his phone, qualified for the Pro Tour, and then made it to the championship match. In his first like year of playing Magic / like first tournament.
Oh, wow.
It's insane. Like this is the kind of story that you love to hear about.
The underdog, yeah. I think that's maybe reinforcing the fact that they want to keep standard in more of a electronic environment or electronic format, just to have things like that happen where someone picks up a phone app and like, oh, like I'm good at this, maybe I'll spend money on it, and then, oh, I'm really good at this, maybe I'll qualify for this thing, and then they do. And more resources potentially devoted there and less devoted to physical play.
Sorry, I don't mean to
You
interrupt.
got it?
Yeah, I found the guy's name. His name is Benton Madsen.
Okay.
Played Reed Duke in the final for March of Machines Pro Tour event.
Wow. That's amazing. But yeah, so it does seem that, the direction they're heading, at least, or have been heading to some extent, is to try to get it more digitally. And to some degree that has been successful. To others it's maybe not as successful, but it's something. I think it's a little confusing. They kind of have, digital play, standard play, and it's like, or physical play, and it's like, which one do you get into? Is it worth it to spend the resources on the digital? No, it's not. But
No, it's not. And I think really one big change that I think will help a lot of people getting into it is if, when you buy a card and you get this card, you can somehow scan it into the app or something and it's yours. I mean, I'm sure they can figure out some kind of way. Maybe when you're opening up a pack, they're kind of like, they have like seeded codes. So, based off of whatever the little code on the whatever promo card says, you enter that in and it says, oh, we know what you pulled. You pull
Yeah.
this, and this, and you just get it in.
That would, I mean, to integrate both physical and digital, like that would be so good, because there is kind of that divide right now. They've made like baby steps towards it. I think one of the new products they're releasing, which is like some kind of starter deck, is like it has like arena codes to play those starter decks in arena. But like
Finally.
again, finally, right? 3 years later, we asked for it 3 years ago. It's like, but that's I think there could be more strides taken in that direction, and done the right way, not like just done kind of, haphazardly. But yeah, so standards become more of a digital format for sure. We're seeing changes happen in the fact that it's moving to a 3-year format instead of a 2-year format. And the other thing that we've seen super recently is a few cards get banned from standard, in most likely in anticipation to the development of it moving to a 3-year format.
Ban time.
Well, they announced it moving to the 3-year format, and then the bans came out like a week later, or 2 weeks later or something
like that. The
yeah.
bans only came out 2 days ago, I believe, from the
From when
recording
we're
of this
recording
episode.
this.
Yeah.
Yes. Which also I think is really going to shake up the fact that basically every meta deck for standard is a mid-range deck.
Yeah,
Again?
maybe taking out some of these stapley mid-range cards will help the environment kind of move away from just that.
I think you'll see some evolution and growth in various directions. While it kind of resettles into a new meta.
It's and I know we were talking about this earlier, why maybe they banned Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Invoke Despair, Reckoner Bankbuster, and not Sheoldred. I'm sure there's like a number of reasons they could give, but I think some part of it has to do with the fact that those are some of the earliest cards in the format, like some of the oldest cards in the format.
Well, they were set to rotate out in October, right?
Yeah, and Sheoldred wasn't, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think Sheoldred's in for another year.
Regardless, Sheoldred would have been in for another year, but they've kept kind of the newer product in and taken some of the older products out.
And it's really just the older products that you're seeing kind of jammed into all of the decks that can.
Yeah.
Like, Reckoner Bankbuster is one of the cards that they just banned. It's a colorless artifact, can literally be played in any of the decks.
Yep.
Any deck that wants it.
It's like what? Turn 2, cast it. Turn 3, draw cards off it.
Yeah.
Like pretty much for the next few turns. So that one, I think, yeah, that makes sense as a ban. I think all of them do. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Invoke Despair. I wonder if Sheoldred is more powerful than some of them, but I think the bottom line is that they've taken out pieces that were like, okay, I'm building a Rakdos deck, so I run 4 Fable of the Mirror Breakers, 4 Invoke Despairs, and 4 Reckoner Bankbusters.
So, going back through some of like the techs and stuff like that I'm thinking about, I think Invoke Despair makes Sheoldred a better card.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because
Probably.
like it's you're drawing probably at least one card off of the Invoke. So now it's, get rid of a bunch of stuff on your opponent's board, deal 2 damage to them, and you gain 2 life plus your draw from that turn.
Yeah. Sheoldred definitely they make each other better. Those cards are really good. But I think Sheoldred's also just good on its own without Invoke Despair. Like,
Sure.
I think Sheoldred, it's kind of been the thing that's been happening to Standard over and over again, and this is maybe a critique with the newer kind of way they've done things, is like, first it was, what was the card from Midnight Hunt that they banned?
Meat Hook Massacre.
Meat Hook Massacre.
Yeah.
First it was Meat Hook Massacre that was oppressive, so they took Meat Hook Massacre out, and then it was Invoke Despair, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Now, Sheoldred is also on that list now, but they took those out, and now it's like almost like Sheoldred. So it's like
Next
almost
year, we're going to be talking about
how-
Sheoldred being banned.
exactly, and then you get the question of like, okay, if I want to build a standard deck and I'm running the color black in it, is it worth it for me to buy Sheoldred right now? Because it seems like in a year from now, when that's the most oppressive card in the format and the oldest one, because Dominaria United is going to be the oldest set when the previous year rotates out, like that almost seems like it's being set up for a ban, unless they add a bunch of like really powerful stuff in the format, or just like a card that says 0 mana, destroy Sheoldred the Apocalypse.
Destroy target Sheoldred.
Yeah, destroy target Sheoldred the Apocalypse. But I guess like, there's that risk right now with like, oh, like I want to play standard. I want to play one of the better decks right now, or my favorite color, whatever. But like, if you followed the trends, like, how long is it safe? How long do you have Sheoldred for before they're like, okay, like this card's just as powerful as the ones we just banned, but we had to wait like a little longer so that we'd get your money first.
Well, I don't think it's that they're trying to get the money. I think it's, like, all right, cool. These ultra powerful cards that are kind of homogenous with, every deck that can run them does. All right, you get 2 years of that, and then we're going to kick it out of the format. Whereas like you can still play with other cards that we designed, 3 years ago that we're going to let stick around, but when it becomes, every deck runs these cards. Yeah, you're going to get 2 years of that, and then we're kicking it out of the format to spice it up. We're not going to let the format stagnate for 3 years, and then, now you're like, okay, cool, what's the meta now? Because you just kicked out 85% of the decks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I can see the logic behind that, where Sheoldred has been around for like 6 months less than these other cards, and that definitely makes a difference to some extent. So maybe moving forward, that's like the direction they take bans. Like, and maybe it's not even the worst direction. Just like, this thing has been in the format for the longest and is the most oppressive, even though this card that we just made is equally, if not more oppressive. It's only been in the format for a month.
Atraxa.
Hey, don't forget about Raffine.
Yeah, I wonder what happens with Raffine, right? Because that's
There's a lot of speculation going around saying that Esper Legends is going to be the new deck to beat.
Raffine is pretty good in standard, being like a 3-drop legend that has the connive triggers on it. Like,
Yeah.
But you have to be really sunk into the mana fixing. There's some conditions to.
there are triomes,
listen.
there are pain lands, there are fast lands, and there are slow lands.
And
in
there are
standard.
treasures.
And there are treasures. Like, mana fixing in standard right now, like,
is not a problem.
you need to spend money on it.
Like Atraxa is very playable right now, which is part of why it's so busted.
Yeah, that's actually crazy to think about. You need 4 colors and then some to cast it, and that's not a problem right now because of like, and I like it, don't get me wrong. I prefer these kind of mana bases to like,
Monocolor plus
15
Tapland.
mountains, 15 forests, or so. Yeah, like plus Taplands. Like, I do not like that mana base. So it's cool to see. It's just color fixing isn't really the problem right now, but so Raffine could be the next target, because Raffine is technically been in the format longer than Sheoldred, so who knows? But I think there's a lot of ways that moving forward, what's been happening could move in a positive direction, could move in a negative direction. What do you guys think, like, just off the bat? Like, is standard moving in a better direction or a worse direction?
So it's hard for me to gauge just because I don't play Arena, and that is so much of the space that Standard is being played in. But based on like the what I'm seeing and the card pools and where I think the logic is coming from with some of the decisions that they're making at the rules committee, is I think it's going in a positive direction.
Okay. So we got one person positive. What do you think, Ron?
I don't know, because I don't even know if it is necessarily positive nor is it negative. I mean, I'd like to think that it's positive and that all these changes that Wizards is making is going to help the health of the format, but really I don't know. I really don't think that these specific changes, just by what they've shown us right now, are going to have too much impact on the format. Again, because if they were gonna ban something, they would have just banned it. I guess the fact that they announced this whole extension date before, for letting things rotate out and then banning those 3 cards, that might have been like, oh, okay, we understand these 3 cards are a problem, but since we're not rotating, we'll just go ahead and ban them right now instead of just letting them rotate out. Whereas, it's like if they, let's just say, introduce like a crazy broken card in the next standard legal set, are they going to wait the full cycle now, or are they going to be a lot more decisive about these bans and a lot more quick and responsive about them? And even then, I don't know. It's like, I'm not. These changes don't make me want to particularly play Standard necessarily. They don't make me want to not play it anymore, but I'm like, cool. I still don't see Standard as an accessible format overall, and I don't know that a lot of Commander players will still see it this way. And I think until they really start to hammer down, letting you use more cards from your collection and somehow reviving paper play, maybe that just means we need a lot more cheap staples somehow. Maybe just flood the market with some really good Standard cards, and sure, we might have hold on, let me finish. Varied busted cards, like if each set kind of has a stronger card, but it's all within the same moderate power level, but you have these powerful cards that are fun for Commander, fun for Standard, but at the same time, you have other powerful answers. So you can get a bit of a rock, paper, scissors type scenario. But hey, at this point, it sounds like much healthier than just mid-range megalomania, or just, like a few specific cards and a few archetypes taking over. Like, I think of Pauper a little bit, and I feel like that format feels a little rock, paper, scissorsy sometimes. But I think it's in a very healthy place in its meta life. Yeah. So I don't know whether it's positive or negative. I like to think it's positive, but I don't know. It's I guess is neutral an answer?
Yeah, neutral's an answer.
I'm gonna say I'm lukewarm.
One positive, one neutral.
Took me a long time to say that. Yeah. We'll cut some of that out. It's okay.
No, we won't. It's gonna stay in there.
We'll keep it all in.
My tired
We're gonna have someone time how long it took you to say neutral.
Dude, I'm getting tired.
So I think I'm probably in the same boat as you, though, where I kind of think it's neutral. I think time will tell. It's hard to tell right now what the changes are. What we've seen is that Standard has been better than it was when Eldraine was in it. So
sure.
I mean, maybe that's not a difficult task to make a better Standard than Eldraine.
I don't know. We're going back to Eldraine pretty soon here.
I know, about to be back in Eldraine. God. Can you imagine they just reprint all the busted cards?
Or are they just printing brand new busted cards?
Here's what my horrible prediction is that in Eldraine, you know how we've seen in Aftermath all of these planeswalkers become legendary creatures? Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised if we saw legendary creature Oko. Like,
no Spark Oko?
No Spark Oko, but like ETB, make a food token, turn something into an elk, deal 40 damage to your opponent.
That'd
do a
be
victory
pretty.
lap around the table.
That'd be pretty funny, but
Stupid, sexy Oko.
I don't know. We'll see what they do. I'd like to think they learn from their mistake with that specific card.
Yeah, I think they probably I'm thinking they might not make Oko as busted, but I feel like they can't ignore that they're doing legendary, planeswalkers are now legendary creatures, and Oko was such a big hit with all the people playing Magic. So what if we did a new Oko, but he's not so busted, but he can be your commander? I don't know. I could see that going. So yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I think we're heading in a neutral direction. Maybe, it's yet to be seen how they handle everything, but it could be great. Could be that these new sets coming up are more Kamigawa Neon Dynasties. It could be these new sets coming up are more Strixhavens, which I do really like Strixhaven, but it had some duds in it. Or Eldraines, which pushed the other way, But yeah, I think, Ron also touched on another format that we have been playing almost nonstop. Not exactly nonstop, but
We've been playing it a hell of a lot more than Standard, that's for sure.
We've been playing it almost more than we play Commander recently.
At this point, yeah, it's hard getting the pod to meet up.
We've been playing a lot of Pauper, which maybe we can do a future episode on that, because
Let's do it.
That format, I cannot give it enough praises right now. It is so fun. It is so powerful. There's so many varied decks in the meta. You can just build whatever you want out of commons, and then, with a ban list, and then go and punch someone in the face with it.
4 Soul Rings.
And for the price,
Soul Ring's uncommon.
And for the
It's also banned.
yes. And for the price of 1 Shieldred, you can buy an entire top S tier deck with a sideboard and everything.
Maybe even 2.
Maybe
even
probably
2.
not 2 for the top is top. It's gotten a bit more expensive than it used to be, but it's still
Well,
1
because
Shieldred.
have you noticed
for a
that
deck.
cards have just gotten more expensive than they used to be?
Yeah.
It's valid. It's valid.
But yeah, certain staples in the format, one thing I was comparing it to was Cody and I were talking about modern decks, and it's okay, either I can make a modern deck, which I can never really play unless I find a modern tournament or locally around us, which is not easy to find.
Way easier to find modern than it is Standard or anything else. There's absolutely modern events in our area. Same with Pioneer, which is a little cheaper.
Okay, well, still getting into it at $400, $500, maybe $1,000 if you want the flexibility to build whatever deck you want, or buy every single staple ever printed in Pauper, buy every single card you could ever want, and still have half of your budget from the modern deck left over. It's such a good format. We need to do an episode on it. Maybe one of these next ones.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that's all we have today for Standard and how the future's looking for it. Hoping for the best, of course, but we'll see what happens as always. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, there'll be some more new changes that have just blown our minds or something like that. But until then, I think we're heading out.
Adios.
We'll catch you next time.
Hasta la bye-bye.